Most men are not weak because they lack strength. They're weak because they were trained to misunderstand reality. Your father, if he meant well, taught you to be honest, respectful, and patient. He taught you to wait your turn, to trust the system, to believe effort would be rewarded fairly. What he forgot to teach you is how the world actually works when pressure appears. Machiavelli understood this early, not as a cynic, as an observer. Here is the first ruthless truth your father likely avoided. The world does not reward virtue. It rewards leverage. Virtue without leverage is decoration. It looks good. It feels right, but it does not protect you. Men who rely on goodness alone are shocked when they are ignored, replaced, or betrayed. Not because the world is cruel, but because they were unprepared. Most fathers teach morality as protection. If you do the right thing, things will work out. That sentence has destroyed more men quietly than any enemy ever could. Because it trains a man to expect fairness instead of preparing him for competition. Machiavelli would tell you this without comfort. Fairness is not guaranteed. Strength must be built. Not physical strength. Not loud dominance, structural strength. The kind that comes from understanding incentives, power, and timing. Here is the first piece of advice your father likely skipped. Never confuse intention with outcome. You can mean well and still lose. You can be ethical and still be sidelined. You can be loyal and still be discarded. Outcomes respond to positioning, not sincerity. Once you understand this, you stop taking failure personally, and you stop being naive. This is where most men go wrong early in life. They believe effort is enough. They believe patience guarantees progress. They believe respect is returned automatically. Machiavelli knew better. Respect follows consequence. Progress follows leverage. Security follows preparation. This is not bitterness. It is adulthood. The moment a man accepts that the world does not owe him reciprocity, he stops begging for it. He starts building. This is also where psychology enters. A man who has not integrated this truth becomes resentful. He did everything right, yet feels overlooked. So he either collapses into passivity or overcompensates with aggression. Both are forms of weakness. The grounded man does something else. He adjusts his expectations without abandoning his values. He stops seeking moral validation and starts developing inner authority. That authority is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand agreement. It observes first. Your father may have taught you how to be good, but Machiavelli would insist you learn how to be effective, because goodness without effectiveness is how men get used. This is the beginning of ruthless advice, not because it hardens you, but because it wakes you up. In the next segment, we'll dismantle another dangerous myth. Why being liked makes men weak, why approval is a leash, and why men who fear disapproval are always negotiating from below. Because the first step to becoming a man is realizing the world will not protect you. You must. Real dominance begins in the mind. Most men are controlled by a fear they rarely admit, the fear of being disliked, so they soften themselves. They delay decisions. They tolerate disrespect. And they call it being reasonable. Machiavelli would call it surrender. Here is the second ruthless truth your father likely avoided. Approval is leverage. The moment you need to be liked, someone else has power over your behavior. You hesitate where you should decide. You explain where you should act. You negotiate boundaries that should never be negotiable. Not because you are kind, but because you are afraid. Fathers often teach boys to get along. What they don't teach is the cost of over-agreeableness. Men who chase approval lose position quietly. They become predictable. They become pliable. They become manageable. And manageable men are rarely respected. Machiavelli understood something Adler would later describe psychologically. Men who lack real power compensate with moral superiority. They try to be seen as good because they do not feel effective. This is false confidence. It looks calm until pressure arrives. Here is the third ruthless truth. People test men who seek approval, not consciously, instinctively. When boundaries soften, they are pushed. When consequences disappear, behavior escalates. This is not cruelty. It is human nature responding to weakness. Most men blame others for this. Machiavelli would blame positioning. If you are constantly tested, it means your structure is unclear. Here is what your father likely never said. Respect does not come from being liked. It comes from being consistent. Consistency creates predictability. Predictability creates safety. Safety creates respect. But consistency requires something difficult, the willingness to disappoint. This is where emotional regulation becomes decisive. A man who cannot tolerate disapproval will always trade authority for relief. He will explain himself into weakness. He will overgive to restore harmony. He will abandon his standards to avoid tension. And tension is unavoidable. The man who becomes dangerous in the right way can sit inside discomfort without reacting. He does not rush to repair emotions. He does not seek immediate understanding. He does not chase reconciliation at the cost of self-respect. This is containment, and containment is power. Machiavelli never told men to be cruel. He told them to be ungovernable by emotion, because men ruled by fear of disapproval are ruled by everyone else. Here is the quiet shift that changes everything. You stop asking, will they like this? And you start asking, is this aligned? That single question reorders your life. When a man stops chasing approval, his words become fewer. His decisions become cleaner. His presence becomes heavier. Not intimidating, grounded. Now let's confront another myth your father likely passed down. Why patience without leverage turns into stagnation. Why waiting your turn is often a trap. And why men who don't act decisively are quietly replaced by men who do. Because the world does not reward hesitation. It rewards clarity. Real dominance begins in the mind. Your father probably told you to be patient, to wait your turn, to trust the process, to believe effort would eventually be noticed. Machiavelli would call this dangerous advice. Not because patience is wrong, but because patience without leverage is submission. Here is the third ruthless truth your father likely never explained. Time does not reward men. Position does. Waiting does not create opportunity. Being prepared to act does. Men who rely on patience alone are often overtaken by men who understand timing. And timing favors those who move decisively. Most men misunderstand patience. They think it means endurance. They think it means tolerance. They think it means staying put until someone recognizes their value. But the world does not scan for quiet virtue. It responds to visible strength and clear positioning. Machiavelli observed this repeatedly. Men who hesitate are replaced. Men who delay are bypassed. Men who wait for permission rarely receive it. Not because they were wrong, but because they were slow. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The man who does not act when the moment appears teaches the world he can be ignored. This is not punishment. It is feedback. Many men confuse humility with passivity. They stay silent when they should speak. They stay loyal when alignment is gone. They stay still when movement is required. And then they feel invisible. That invisibility is not bad luck. It is positioning. Machiavelli understood something Jung would later articulate psychologically. A man who fears stepping forward is often afraid of confronting his shadow, his ambition, his assertiveness, his capacity to disrupt. So he suppresses it. And suppression turns into stagnation. The dangerously smart man does not rush, but he does not freeze. He watches carefully. He reads the moment. And when the window opens, he moves without apology. This is decisiveness without aggression. Your father may have taught you patience to keep you safe. Machiavelli would teach you discernment to keep you relevant. Patience is valuable, but only when paired with readiness. Here is the shift that changes a man's trajectory. You stop waiting to be chosen. You start choosing when to act. That shift creates leverage. Leverage does not mean domination. It means optionality, the ability to leave, the ability to advance, the ability to say no without fear. Men without leverage cling. Men with leverage decide. This is where emotional regulation becomes critical. A man who panics under uncertainty will miss the moment. A man who can tolerate risk recognizes opportunity, and opportunity favors calm men. Machiavelli was not telling men to be reckless. He was telling them to stop confusing patience with virtue, because patience without action is how men disappear quietly. Now let's confront another truth your father likely avoided. Why loyalty without boundaries becomes exploitation. Why being too dependable is dangerous, and why men who never withdraw are taken for granted. Because loyalty is only valuable when it can be withheld. Your father probably taught you loyalty. To stand by people. To stay committed. To endure difficulty without complaint. Machiavelli would agree with one condition. Loyalty without boundaries is not virtue. It is availability. And availability is exploited. Here is the fourth ruthless truth your father likely never said aloud. The man who never withdraws teaches others they don't to respect him. Not intentionally, structurally. When access to you is unconditional, your presence loses value. This applies to work, to friendships, to relationships. And men who pride themselves on being dependable often discover they are also replaceable. Most men misunderstand loyalty. They think it means staying no matter what. They think leaving is betrayal. They think endurance equals strength. Machiavelli saw something colder and more accurate. Loyalty only has power when it can be withdrawn. Here is the uncomfortable reality. If you cannot leave, you cannot negotiate. And if you cannot negotiate, you are not choosing loyalty. You are trapped in it. Men who lack boundaries often say yes automatically. They absorb extra work, tolerate disrespect, and carry emotional weight that isn't theirs. And they tell themselves they're being strong. But strength without choice is servitude. This is where most men get angry later. They feel used, overlooked, taken for granted. Machiavelli would say the mistake happened earlier, the moment they failed to set limits. Here is the psychological truth Jung would recognize immediately. Men who fear abandonment cling to loyalty as identity. They say, "I'm not the kind of man who leaves." But what they really saying is, "I'm afraid of what happens if I walk away." That fear creates dependence. And dependence erodes authority. The grounded man understands a deeper rule. Loyalty is meaningful only when it is chosen repeatedly, not when it is compulsory. He stays because alignment exists. He leaves when it doesn't, without threats, without resentment, without drama. Winnicott would call this emotional maturity, the capacity to separate without collapsing or retaliating. A man who can separate cleanly does not cling, and men who do not cling are not exploited. Machiavelli understood this in alliances. Those who stay regardless of treatment invite disrespect. Those who can withdraw quietly command consideration. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming sovereign. A man who governs himself does not fear withdrawal. He knows his value does not come from endurance alone. Here is the rule that prevents exploitation. Stay loyal while alignment exists. Withdraw when it ends, early, calmly, without apology. Most men wait too long. They wait until resentment builds, until dignity erodes, until the exit becomes dramatic. That drama is not strength. It is delayed self-respect. Machiavelli would advise something simpler. Leave at the first clear sign that loyalty is no longer mutual, not angrily, not loudly, decisively. Now we'll bring everything together. In the final part, we'll cover the lesson your father likely never taught you. Why a man who cannot govern himself will always be governed by others. Because the ultimate form of power is not control over people, it is mastery over yourself. Everything you've heard so far points to this. If a man cannot govern himself, he will always be governed by something else, by approval, by fear, by habit, by other people's expectations. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology gave it language. Here is the fifth and final ruthless truth your father likely never taught you. Self-mastery is the only protection that lasts. Not morality alone. Not loyalty alone. Not patience alone. Those only work when they are chosen, not when they are reflexes. Most men live reactively. They respond to pressure instead of anticipating it. They adjust themselves instead of setting conditions. They explain themselves instead of standing still. And reaction is where power leaks out. The man who has done the inner work moves differently. He does not rush to fix situations emotionally. He does not chase reassurance. He does not panic when things are unclear. He tolerates uncertainty. And that tolerance creates authority. This is where Jung's individuation becomes visible. A man who has integrated his fear of conflict does not avoid it. A man who has integrated his capacity for aggression does not misuse it. A man who has integrated his shadow does not fear himself. And because he does not fear himself, he is not easily manipulated. Adler would recognize the shift immediately. There is no false superiority here, no posturing, no compensation. Just quiet confidence rooted in competence and self-trust. Winnicott would call this the true self. A man who is not performing strength, but embodying it. He does not need to dominate. He does not need to persuade. He does not need to threaten. His presence carries weight because it is internally aligned. This is the man Machiavelli was really writing for. Not the tyrant, not the manipulator, but the man who sees clearly and therefore cannot be easily controlled. When you master yourself, you stop begging for fairness. You stop chasing approval. You stop enduring what violates alignment. You decide. You act. You withdraw when necessary. Quietly. This is the kind of strength no one can take from you, because it does not depend on position, praise, or permission. It comes from internal order. Your father may have taught you how to be good. Machiavelli would teach you how to be sovereign. And sovereignty, real sovereignty, is the difference between a man who survives the world and a man who is shaped by it. Real dominance begins in the mind.